When you study women going through menopause transition, even if they eat exactly the same amount of food, the same type of food, and do the same exercise, they will gain this visceral fat, so fat around their organs inside, which the Meno belly is a marker for.
Welcome to Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention. Thank you for joining me for episode 2 of season 12. Today on the podcast, we'll be exploring a topic that is perhaps the one that is the most requested for women to learn more about, and that is the dreaded Meno belly. This encompasses not just that pesky weight gain that occurs around the belly during menopause, but also the uncomfortable and annoying bloating that can often occur. To talk us through what causes Meno belly and what we can do about it, we are very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Peri Cashel, a GP who specialises in hormones and their impact on health, in particular for women during peri and menopause. Dr. Cashel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Zoe. Absolute pleasure.
All right, so let's start by discussing what causes this weight gain around the belly during menopause.
So there's quite a few mechanisms that are at play in this transition phase of women's life. And it often starts quite a long time before the point of menopause, which is technically 12 months after your last menstrual period, or the day your ovaries are removed or stopped working if you're on certain drugs. And what's happening in that perimenopausal time is your estrogen levels are fluctuating quite wildly. Your progesterone levels are starting to fall quite a lot because women stop ovulating every cycle. So you might be having periods, but actually you're not producing very much progesterone. And also our testosterone has been falling in the background. It's not particularly a menopause drop, but it kind of falls from probably somewhere between our late teens and 20s. So those three hormones are all very metabolically active. And what that means is that all of our cells respond to those hormones. So our little battery packs, our mitochondria, which are really like batteries that live inside every cell, are covered in estrogen receptors and progesterone and testosterone receptors, although we haven't studied those quite so well. So when our cells don't function as energetically because of the falling levels of these hormones, they just don't process energy as well. And one of the outcomes of that is that we start to move into this sort of slower metabolism. So even though you might be eating the same, doing the same amount of exercise, you'll no longer be burning energy quite as efficiently as you were in your 20s or 30s or even 2 years ago. So we see a real sort of slowing down of our metabolic rate.
Yeah.
So that's a big cause. And I think that's a huge thing for women to understand and for doctors to understand, because a lot of the time, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past, is you tell women, well, you just need to eat better or exercise more, and then you'll see the results. But what we know is when you study women going through menopause transition, even if they eat exactly the same amount of food, the same type of food, and do the same exercise, they will gain this visceral fat, so fat around their organs inside, which the Meno belly is a marker for. So that's probably the biggest part, is that direct effect on our cells. The second thing is all of the indirect things that happen. So all of those symptoms that everybody's talking about these days about perimenopause and menopause, of which the list is ever growing, and that is because every cell has estrogen receptors. So things like poor quality sleep. So sleep, I would always say, is the laziest way to stay fit and healthy and slim. But most women who are in this phase know that sleep often checks out. So not being able to sleep well will contribute to weight gain. Poor quality of sleep. So women often start to snore, and that poor oxygen exchange can drive up cortisol. It can impair quite a few things, but again, it can drive weight up. And the more weight you gain, the more likely you are to snore. And then there's multiple things happening. So you start to gain weight, you're not so motivated, so you don't really want to go to the gym. You have some cravings, you might drink a bit more and eat a bit more cake. And I'm a big advocate of cake, but apparently it's limited in its health properties. And, so those kind of things that are indirect will all contribute to this little gathering. I've always had a belly, so I'm not particularly bothered. I've had a belly since I was 12. So I'm not one of those women that went from having a six pack. But for those women who have been proud of their six pack, it can be quite confronting to see this body shape change in perimenopause.
And so do we know why it sort of focuses itself around the middle? Because, I've always had a, big bum. But then, during menopause, why does the weight not go to where it typically went before? And why does it cling to our midsection? Because it's visceral fat as opposed to subcutaneous, is that right?
No, I mean, that's certainly part of that weight is, a lot of that is subcutaneous fat. So there are places where women can gather extra fat, and some of us preferentially lay it down in our hips and our buttocks, and that is considered generally to be a bit more metabolically healthy. So that is actually a better place to put your fat. For some reason, the cells around the abdomen don't seem to cope as well with the extra fat, and we're not quite sure of the mechanism, or I'm not quite sure, somebody else might be, but certainly that fat around your abdomen does seem to be a predictor for more fat around our organs, which is what then can cause an increased risk of disease. It's not the fat so much in the belly itself, it's inside the stomach, around the liver, around the organs. That's the problem.
Yes, right. And so we've talked about the hormones that are at play with menopause. Are there any other sort of hormone imbalances separate to that could also be contributing to menobelly?
Absolutely. One of the things that we commonly see is a change in thyroid function in perimenopause. So again, because of these falling levels of estrogen, women are more likely to develop an autoimmune condition like a autoimmune thyroid problem. And if your thyroid gland becomes underactive, then that also will drive weight gain, reduce your energy. So again, another very similar effect. And you see a lot of women who've been diagnosed with an underactive thyroid and they go on their thyroid hormone and they're a bit better, but nobody's thought to think about their perimenopause. So we're quite good at picking up underactive thyroids, not so good at picking up perimenopause, but absolutely thyroid. And other things like if you've got heavy menstrual bleeding, you might become iron deficient, and that certainly means you're more tired, you don't sleep as well, so it has an indirect effect on your energy and your ability to exercise. Low vitamin D is really common. We seem to, our ability to convert it to active vitamin D seems to reduce in perimenopause, and vitamin D is important in a lot of chemical pathways. So I would always be checking thyroid, cholesterol, sugar levels, and vitamin D in women in perimenopause.
And what about stress? Because we hear a lot about that sort of cortisol causing weight gain. So how does stress play a role in belly fat during menopause?
Yes. So our stress response means that we produce more cortisol, and that's really useful if you're running away from, a saber-toothed tiger. It's not so useful if you're just in a really difficult job, painful marriage, struggling with your beautiful teenagers, so that chronic cortisol drives inflammation, and your body's, our basic responses as humans are to prepare for very primitive things like a famine. So stress usually means that there's probably going to be a food shortage. So that's why we put down that belly fat. It's there for emergencies, but in modern environment, it just then drives inflammatory processes and chronic disease. So we don't need it because we always, pretty much most of us always have a steady supply of food. So we've got this nice emergency bag of fat in our tummy, but we don't need it.
Yes. Now, I mean, you've said how much estrogen plays a part in this. So how does menopause hormone therapy, work with this issue? You would think then that if we're running out of estrogen, then supplying more might help us. Would it be that simple?
So it's certainly part of the picture. It's not all, but it is quite a significant part of the picture. So women who take HRT seem to not gain the same level of visceral fat. I wouldn't ever say it is a weight loss drug, but when you're on hormone replacement therapy, certainly post-menopausally, when you're not producing your own estrogen, you'll be able to build muscle better. So women on estrogen who then are weight training will build muscle more efficiently. And muscle is jam-packed with these little battery cells or mitochondria. So that really boosts your training to make you very metabolically fit again. It seems to improve our cells' sensitivity to insulin, which is really how we move glucose around the body. So we can change that glucose into glycogen, which gets stored in our muscles, as opposed to it getting spilling over and being converted into fat or sitting in the liver. So the estrogen keeps the liver health really effective. It keeps the cells sensitive to insulin. It probably also protects our gut microbiome. We're learning more and more about the microbiome effects in so many diseases, but in menopause transition, they estimate that women may lose anywhere up to a third of the diversity of good bacteria in their gut, which feeds into both the bloating that you mentioned, but also all of these other metabolic inflammatory processes. So perhaps, estrogen, it maintains the gut microbiome as well. So those are big things, and also makes us more sensitive to our, maintaining our vitamin D. You've got more energy. So that's where estrogen supports the lifestyle measures of eating well, not drinking, exercising, sleeping well, staying socially connected, and probably also really helps your breathing. Breathing through your nose is very important for healthy metabolism, and it's pretty free. You don't need to go and see anybody. Have a big sniff.
Quick, yes. Okay, so let's knuckle down on some of these. So you've mentioned diet. So what are the dietary changes or habits that women should focus on to, I guess, help manage weight around their bellies?
Well, yeah, I think if anybody is following any of the menopause doctors, they'll know that protein is key. I would tend to say aiming for somewhere between 1 gram to 1.5 grams per ideal body weight. So not necessarily the body weight you're at now, of protein per day. So on average, it's about somewhere around sort of 90 grams a day. So that's 3 times 30 grams, which most women do not hit unless, so if somebody says to me, I'm definitely getting my protein, I always ask, do you count? And if they don't count, guaranteed they're not hitting their protein, because it's a lot, so that's 30 grams would be a good sized chicken breast, a full tin of tuna. You can't get 30 grams out of natural yogurt, so it requires effort. And the other thing is plenty of fiber, so somewhere between 25 and 30 grams of fiber, ideally through plant-based food. So you get all of the other cool stuff in plants, all of the antioxidants and polyphenols, which again our cells and our mitochondria just love. They clear out the rust. The protein builds everything up. The plants clear out the rubbish.
Yep. Let's just go back a bit to exercise. You just mentioned strength training before. So, are there specific exercises that are much more effective at particularly combating menobelly?
When people want to lose weight, I would always encourage them to shift that, because there's quite a negative framework, and think about building muscle. So everything that you're doing is about nourishing your body, building your body up to be your fittest, best self for the next half of your life. And muscle is really key to longevity, so losing weight is not going to dramatically affect your lifespan. Building a ton of muscle really will. So it is to be metabolically as fit as you can. So to really be able to burn and be strong and packed with mitochondria, you want lots of skeletal muscle. So that's your biceps, your triceps, your glutes, your hamstrings, your quads, your six pack. And it doesn't matter if it's, coated in a nice wee fluffy, soft doona of subcutaneous fat, as long as it's there. So definitely for women, weight training is really important. That's the ideal. I always say whatever you want to do and whatever you will do is still the best exercise. If you hate the gym and you're never going to weight train, then we're not going anywhere. But weight training gets the best. So that's 4 reps to failure, not 20 reps. So it's like a heavy weight, whatever weight is heavy enough that you will only do 4 or 5 reps, and then you have to stop. You repeat that 4 times, and you choose 3 or 4 exercises, and you do that 3 times a week. Very short, high intensity, and then exercises, and also very much the kind of more walking where you're just getting your heart rate up a bit. So not really spin classes or running marathons. That doesn't seem to have the same health benefits. But if that's what you like, do it. But just in terms of injury prevention as well, it's really important to have good muscles to protect your joints from those more intense workouts. So for metabolism optimization, it's lift the heavy shit.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about bloating. Why is bloating so much more prevalent around menopause?
So I think anybody that's had a menstrual cycle will know, or most women will have experienced that variation in gut motility across the 28 days or 30 days of the menstrual cycle. So So it's estrogen and progesterone probably much more have an effect on how your gut moves. So your gut moves stuff from your mouth down to the anus and out the other end, by a process called peristalsis, and that's a smooth muscle activity. So that smooth muscle is also covered in hormone receptors. So for some women, it slows down, they become more constipated. Other women, it speeds up. They get more acid reflux. They get more bloating. They get more diarrhea. And again, I suspect the change in both our microbiome in our mouth, because we mouth breathe a bit more in menopause, but also the loss of microbiome in our lower gut will affect the bloating. So you've got more gas producing, not so friendly bacteria, fizzing away. So gas in your lower bowel is as a result of bacteria. If you're burping more, that's because you're swallowing too much air. But if you're farting more, that's some unfriendly bacteria having a wee bit of a party in there, and the balance has gone off.
Right. So what are some lifestyle and dietary measures we can put into place to eliminate some of these issues?
It largely falls back to eating real food. And nothing really that complicated. So eating plenty of protein and plenty of fiber to keep your gut moving, making sure you stay well hydrated. A lot of us, sort of fall back on just having a couple of coffees a day to deal with the exhaustion from insomnia and, overwhelm of life, but really trying to drink, plenty of water, eating your fiber, and being careful not to eat too late. I think, again, because our lives are so busy, we're often eating at 9:00 at night. We often put ourselves at the bottom of the pile of things to do. But remembering that our gut, like everything else, really needs a rest. So trying not to eat too late. So trying to eat between sort of 8:00 and 6:00. There's a lot of chat about fasting and time-restricted eating. But my mum would always say, that's just eating when it's daylight and going to bed, which is very true. I think that, we try and fight against too much of how our bodies are programmed. So we should eat when it's light and not eat when it's dark. That's how our body is designed. So those are very simple hacks that you can introduce.
Absolutely.
Hot flushes? No sweat. Try Premensal Menopause products to relieve common menopausal symptoms for both perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. Premensal understands that hot flushes and night sweats are not the only things going on in your life. This is why Premensal has added 2 new products to their range. New Premensal Libido and Energy, because face it, we all could do with a boost of both. And new Premensal Brain Fog to help increase short-term memory, mental recall, and reduce cognitive fatigue. Now, where did I put my keys? Premensal provides premium holistic supplement care for women using evidence-based ingredients for products you can trust. Premensal is here to help you take control of your own health and live your best life. Plus, check out our brand new look in-store now. Always read the label and follow directions for use.
When does Meno belly start to become a health risk rather than just sort of an aesthetic concern? Like what are some of the risks associated with menopause-related belly fat or that visceral fat?
So we know that certainly body mass index, which is a calculation you get based on somebody's weight and somebody's height, is very inaccurate in estimating how much visceral fat that you have. It's much better to use other measurements. At home, you can measure your waist-hip ratio. And for women, the waist-to-hip ratio should be less than 0.85. So that's a much better marker. So I would have a lot of women whose BMI might be 26, 27, or even 23, 24, which is very much in the normal range, but they've still got all of this weight sitting around their middle. The other interesting thing that I was reading recently is measuring somebody's neck circumference is actually a really good marker of visceral fat. And I do see a lot of women will be gaining weight around their neck, and that has impacts on sleep quality. So you really want to see that your neck is less than 34 centimeters. So those are simple tests anybody can do. Most gyms nowadays have body comp scanners so that you can go and actually measure what your level of visceral fat is. And I think that's really useful, because we know there's a significant number of women that would be technically considered thin. So they're called toffees, which is a bit depressing. So that's thin on the outside and fat on the inside.
Right.
So TOFI. So, and sometimes you can be carrying quite a lot of weight and actually it's all muscle and your visceral fat is very low. So the measurements that we've traditionally used can overdiagnose a fat problem in some people and really underdiagnose it in others. So waist-hip ratio, neck circumference of less than 34 centimeters, and then progressing to more significant measurements like the body comp scanner. And there is risks associated with carrying extra visceral fat. We really see a lot of women developing what's called fatty liver disease, is associated with menopause transition. And that fat deposition in the liver means your liver is not as efficient at both producing proteins that are important for health, but also at clearing out waste products. So that again is another part of the process where extra visceral fat can drive up inflammation, drive up your risk of chronic disease. Increased visceral fat is associated with, diabetes would be the classic one that everybody knows about, but also heart disease and possibly dementia, and also an increased risk of quite a few of the cancers as well. So it does have health risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Struggling with thinning hair or lack of volume? You're not alone. New Nordic's Hair Volume Supplement is formulated with herbal ingredients like zinc and biotin to support thicker, healthier hair. Plus, it nourishes your nails and skin for a complete beauty boost. Discover the benefits at hairvolume.au and give your hair the support it needs naturally.
So are there any medications or treatments that you recommend to help with abdominal weight gain during menopause?
So I think it's very much up to the individual. So I would be a big proponent of body identical hormone therapy because you get quite a lot for your buck when you take HRT. It often treats a lot of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause, but it also gives you the energy and motivation to introduce the lifestyle measures, which I would still say are key for longevity and health in general, as well as dealing with, a menobelly. So getting you to the gym, making you eat better. And it's a more slow, sustained approach. But definitely there's supplements that have some evidence. There's supplements like inositol, berberine, and sodium butyrate, which do seem to help the gut microbiome and then help insulin sensitivity. So they're natural supplements that people can try. And then you can progress to the very trendy GLP-1s, which are the weight loss injections, which really have, exploded in terms of how we treat weight gain and are very, very effective. It's important to be aware that although these are very effective drugs, they do have side effects like some of the symptoms that we've mentioned in perimenopause. So increased wind, both burping and increased flatulence. And they can cause heartburn, they can cause constipation. And the more serious risks would be there's some signs that they do increase thyroid cancer, although the baseline risk of thyroid cancer is very rare in the general population. There is does seem to be an increased risk of thyroid cancer, but those numbers are small. There's an increased risk of pancreatitis, which is inflammation and swelling of the pancreas gland, which can make you extremely ill. Again, it's rare, but it's significant. And for some people, their stomach can go into a paralyzed state. So this slowing down of the gut actually is at a state level where your gut your stomach stops moving, and that can make you pretty sick as well. I haven't seen any of these. I do see a lot of indigestion, burping, constipation, wind, and some people just feel a little bit flat because these medications are very, very active in our brain, which is partly why they work. They turn off food noise, so people don't think about food as much, which is, I think, a lot of people find quite liberating. But equally, sometimes you don't get as excited about things that you used to get as excited about. So it's complex. Why people eat and how people eat is extremely psychosocial. So there's a lot of things can come to the surface when somebody starts those injections. It's a really interesting type of medicine.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And in your experience, do people tend to put the weight back on afterwards?
Because they've only become available for weight loss in really since last year, But we do know from clinical studies that is one of the concerns, is that the weight is, people don't keep the weight off. Certainly people who've been in this space in the States for a lot longer, one of the important things is to not try and lose weight too quickly, that you should never be trying to lose more than 1 kilo per week, and also that you don't expect the injection to do the work. It's really positively reinforcing if you're doing your exercise and your nutrition and you're using the injection and you're losing weight, but you have to do the weight training, you have to change your eating habits at the same time. And I expect that if you really put in those sustainable habits, then yes, you can keep the weight off. But if you just use the injection and you choose to eat half a burger and half a portion of chips and still sit on the couch, you will lose weight. But when you stop, you'll gain it back again. And that's very, very expensive. These are expensive drugs.
They certainly
so you want to make it worthwhile.
What's the connection between insulin resistance and abdominal fat during menopause?
So the cells become insulin resistant, which means they just don't process glucose as effectively. So when the glucose then is rising in your bloodstream, your pancreas starts to produce more insulin. So to try and deal with that extra glucose and package it out away, and then it keeps going up because your cells aren't able to respond. And insulin, the other thing that it does is it acts as a growth factor. So it will stimulate more fat cells to grow. So you get into quite a vicious circle. So you've got these resistant cells, you've got increasing levels of insulin, you've got increasing fat tissue as a result of that high insulin. So the high insulin levels drives fat gain, it drives inflammation, it's got a huge role in multiple chronic disease. So that running with high insulin is a really unhealthy state. And interestingly, I listened to a podcast on some of the best predictors of longevity and future health. And one of them is to have a fasting insulin checked, that high insulin is a really good early marker of future disease. So that's something I now try to do routinely as a marker of, how metabolically fit you are, that you shouldn't be having a high insulin in the fasted state. So I thought that was quite interesting. So high insulin drives multiple chronic diseases and probably contributes towards cancer risk as well.
It's tough out there, isn't it? Okay.
It's not easy being a woman, but I always say, is it worth all the good shoes? I still think it is.
Love it. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But thank you so much, Kerry, for sharing your time and insights with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, thank you for joining us as well. If you liked this episode, we'd love you to rate, review and subscribe. And we hope you'll join us for next week's episode. Meanwhile, for more information about living your best life at midlife, pick up a copy of Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier. See you next time.